Chapter 3. Common Threads in Mythology. Why consider myths? Are they not just fictions from the distant past? While it is true that many are based on fictions, others are based on fact. Take, for example, the myths and legends found worldwide that are based on the fact of the world deluge or flood that the Bible relates. Paragraph 2. A reason for considering myths is that they are the foundation for beliefs and rites still found in religions today. For example, belief in an immortal soul can be traced from ancient Assyrio-Babylonian myths through Egyptian, Greek, and Roman mythology to Christendom, where it has been an underlying tenet in her theology. Myths are evidence that ancient man was searching for God as well as for a meaning in life. In this chapter, we will briefly cover some of the common themes that arise in the myths of the world's major cultures. As we review these mythologies, we will note how creation, the flood, false gods, and demigods, the immortal soul, and sun worship crop up regularly as common threads in the patchwork of mythology. But why should this be the case? Paragraph 3. Very often there is a kernel of historical fact, a person or an event that has later been exaggerated or distorted to form the myth. One of these historical facts is the Bible record of creation. Footnote: for detailed consideration of creation, see the book Life, How Did It Get Here? By Evolution or by Creation, published by the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Paragraph 4. Fact and fiction about creation. Creation myths about around, but none have the simple logic of the Bible's creation record. Genesis chapters 1 and 2, for example, the account given in Greek mythology sounds barbaric. The first Greek to put myths in writing in a systematic way was Hesiod, who wrote his Theogony in the 8th century BCE. He explains how the gods and the world began. He starts off with Gaia, or Gaia, Earth, who gives birth to Uranus, Heaven. What follows is explained by scholar Jasper Griffin in the Oxford History of the Classical World. Paragraph 5. Hesiod tells the story, known to Homer, of the succession of sky gods. First, Uranus was supreme, but supplementary information, Greek and Roman divinities. Many gods and goddesses of Greek mythology held similar positions in Roman mythology. The table below lists some of them. Greek-Roman role: Aphrodite, Venus, goddess of love. Apollo, god of light, medicine, and poetry. Ares, Mars, god of war. Artemis, Diana, goddess of hunting and childbirth. Asclepius, god of healing. Athena, Minerva, goddess of craft, war, and wisdom. Cronus, Saturn, to the Greeks ruler of the Titans and father of Zeus in Roman mythology, also the god of agriculture. Demeter, Ceres, goddess of growing things. Dionysus, Bacchus, god of wine, fertility, and wild behavior. Eris, Cupid, god of love. Gaia, Terra, symbol of the earth and mother and wife of Uranus. Hephaestus, Vulcan, blacksmith for the gods and god of fire and metalworking. Hera, Juno, protector of marriage and women. To the Greeks, sister and wife of Zeus. To the Romans, wife of Jupiter. Hermes, Mercury, messenger for the gods, god of commerce and science, and protector of travelers, thieves, and vagabonds. Hestia, Vesta, goddess of the hearth. Hypnos, Somnus, god of sleep. Pluto, Hades, Pluto, god of the underworld. Poseidon, Neptune, god of the sea, in Greek mythology also god of earthquakes and horses. Rhea, Ops, wife and sister of Cronus. Uranus, son and husband of Gaia and father of the Titans. Zeus, Jupiter, ruler of the gods, suppressed his children, and Gaia encouraged his son Cronus to castrate him. Cronus in turn devoured his own children under his wife Rhea, gave him a stone to eat in place of Zeus. The child Zeus was brought up in Crete, compelled his father to disgorge his siblings, and with them and other aid defeated Cronus and his titans and cast them down into Tartarus. Paragraph 6. From what source did the Greeks get this strange mythology? The same authors answer. Its ultimate origin seems to have been Sumerian. In these Eastern stories, we find a succession of gods, and the motifs of castration, of swallowing, and of a stone recur in ways which, though varying, show that the resemblance with Hesiodus is no coincidence. We have to look to ancient Mesopotamia and Babylon as the source of many myths that permeated other cultures. Paragraph 7. The ancient mythology of Chinese folk region is not always easy to define, since many written records were destroyed in the period 213 through 191 BCE. Some myths have remained, however, such as the one describing how the earth was formed. A professor of Oriental art, Anthony Christie, writes, "We learn that chaos was like a hen's egg. Neither heaven nor earth existed. From the egg, Panku was born, while of its heavy elements earth was made and sky from the light element. Panku is represented as a dwarf, clad in a bearskin or a cloak of leaves. For 18,000 years, the distance between Earth and the sky grew daily by 10 feet, and Panku grew at the same rate so that his body filled the gap. When he died, different parts of his body became various natural elements. His body, fleas, became the human race." Supplementary information. The more recent mythology of China, the result of the influence of Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, will be discussed in chapters 6 and 7. Astro-Babylonian gods and goddesses. Anu, the supreme god reigning over the heavens, father of Ishtar. Ashur, national warrior god of the Assyrians, also god of fertility. Ea, god of water, father of Marduk, warned Utnapishtim of the flood. Enlil, Bel, lord of the air, later paralleled in Greek mythology by Zeus, assimilated by the Babylonians into Marduk, Bel. Ishtar, divine personification of the planet Venus, sacred prostitution a part of her cult. She was Astarte in Phoenician, Atargatis in Syria, Ashtoreth in the Bible, 1 Kings 11:5 verse 33. Aphrodite in Greece, Venus in Rome. Marduk, first among the Babylonian gods, absorbed all the other gods and took over all their various functions, called Merodach by the Israelites. Shamash, sun god of light and justice, forerunner of the Greek Apollo. Sin, moon god, member of the triad that included Shamash, the sun, and Ishtar, the planet Venus. Tammuz, Dumuzi, the harvest god, Ishtar's lover. Paragraph 8. From South America, an Inca legend explains how a mythical creator gave speech to each nation. He gave to each nation the language it was to speak. He gave being and soul to each one, as well as the men and the women, and commanded each nation to sink below the earth. Thence each nation passed underground and came up in the places to which he assigned them. The fables and rites of the Incas by Cristobal de Molina of Cusco, quoted in South American mythology. In this case, it appears that the Bible's account of the confusion of languages at Bethel is the factual kernel for this Inca myth. Genesis 11:1 through 9. But now let us turn our attention to the deluge described in the Bible at Genesis 7:17 through 24. Paragraph 9. The flood factor myth. Taking us back to some 4,500 years ago to about 2,500 BCE, The Bible tells us that rebel spirit sons of God materialized in human form and went taking wives for themselves. This unnatural interbreeding produced the violent Nephilim, the mighty ones who were of old, the men of fame. Their lawless conduct affected the pre-flood world to the point that Jehovah said, I'm going to wipe men whom I have created off the surface of the ground, because I do regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of Jehovah. The account then continues with the specific and practical steps Noah had to take to save himself, as well as his family and a variety of animal kinds from the flood. Genesis 6, 1 through 8, chapter, verses 13 through 8, chapter 22. 1 Peter 3:19 and verse 20. 2 Peter 2:4, Jude 6, paragraph 10. The record of pre-flood events related in Genesis is branded as myth by modern critics, yet the history of Noah was accepted and believed by faithful men such as Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jesus Christ, and the apostles Peter and Paul. It is also supported by the fact that it is reflected in so many mythologies worldwide, including the ancient epic of Gilgamesh, as well as the myths of China and of the Aztecs, Incas, and Maya. With the Bible record in mind, let us now consider the Assyrio-Babylonian mythology and its reference to a flood. Isaiah 54:9, Ezekiel 14:20, Matthew 24:37, Hebrews 11:17. Paragraph 11. The flood and the god-man Gilgamesh. Going back in history, possibly some 4,000 years, we encountered the famous Akkadian myth called the Epic of Gilgamesh. Our knowledge of this is based mainly on a cuneiform text that came from the library of Ashur-banipal, who reigned 668 to 627 BCE in ancient Nineveh. Paragraph 12. It is the story of the exploits of Gilgamesh, described as being two-thirds god and one-third man, or a demigod. One version of the epic states, in Uruk he built walls, a great rampart, and the temple of blessed Iana, for the god of the firmament, Anu, and for Ishtar, the goddess of love, Our Lady of Love and War. See box page 45 for a listing of Assyrio-Babylonian gods and goddesses. However, Gilgamesh was not exactly a pleasant creature to have around. The inhabitants of Uruk complained to the gods. His lust leaves no virgin to her lover, neither the warrior's daughter nor the wife of the noble. Paragraph 13. What action did the gods take in response to the people's protest? The goddess Aruru created Enkidu to be the human rival of Gilgamesh. However, instead of being enemies, they became close friends. In the course of the epic, Enkidu died. Shattered, Gilgamesh cried, When I die, shall I not be like Enkidu? Woe has entered my belly. Fearing death, I roam over the steppe. He wanted the secret of immortality and set out to find Utnapishtim, the deluge survivor who had been given immortality with the gods. Paragraph 4. Gilgamesh eventually finds Unapishtim, who tells him the story of the flood. As found in epic tablets, known as the Flood Tablet, Unapishtim recounts instructions given to him concerning the flood. Tear down this house, build a ship, give up possessions, seek thou life. Aboard the ship take thou the seed of living things. Does this not sound somewhat similar to the Bible's reference to Noah and the flood? But Utnapishtim cannot bestow immortality upon Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, disappointed, returns home to Uruk. The account concludes with his death. The overall message of the epic is the sadness and frustration of death and the hereafter. Those ancient people did not find the God of truth and hope. However, the epic's link to the Bible's simple account of the pre-flood era is quite evident. Now let us turn to the flood account as it appears in other legends. Paragraph 15. Flood legend in other cultures. Even earlier than the account in the Epic of Gilgamesh is the Sumerian myth that presents Zusudra, the counterpart of the biblical Noah, who is described as a pious, a God fearing king, constantly on the lookout for divine revelations in dreams or incantations. Ancient Near Eastern texts relating to the Old Testament. According to the same source, this myth offers the closest and most striking parallel to Bible material as yet uncovered in Sumerian literature. The Babylonian and Assyrian civilizations, which came later, were influenced by Sumerian. Paragraph 16. The book China, History and Art tells us that one of the ancient rulers of China was Yu, the conqueror of the Great Flood. Yu channeled flood waters into rivers and seas to resettle his people. Mythology expert Joseph Campbell wrote about the Chinese period of the Great Tin, saying, "To this important age, which terminates in a deluge, 10 emperors were assigned in the early Chao time mythology. Hence, it appears that what we are viewing here may be a local transformation of the series of the old Sumerian king list." Campbell then cited other items from Chinese legends that appeared to reinforce the argument for a Mesopotamian source. That takes us back to the same basic source of many myths. However, the story of the flood also appears in the Americas. For example, in Mexico during the period of the Aztecs in the 15th and 16th century CE. Supplementary information. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, weighs a heart soul on the left scale against Mat, the goddess of truth and justice, symbolized by a feather. Thoth writes the result on a tablet before announcing it to Osiris. Paragraph 16. Aztec mythology spoke of four previous ages, during the first of which the earth was inhabited by giants. That is another reminder of the Nephilim. The giants referred to in the Bible at Genesis 6:4. It includes a primeval flood legend in which the waters above merge where those below, obliterating the horizons and making of everything a timeless cosmic ocean. The god controlling rain and water was Tlaloc. However, his rain was not obtained cheaply, but was given in exchange for the blood of sacrificial victims, whose flowing tears would simulate and so stimulate the flow of rain. Mythology, an illustrated encyclopedia. Another legend states that the fourth era was ruled by Chauchihutliku, the water goddess, whose universe perished by a flood. Men were saved by becoming fish. Paragraph 18. Similarly, the Incas had their flood legends. British writer Harold Osborne states, perhaps the most ubiquitous feature in South American myth are the stories of a deluge. Myths of a deluge are very widespread among both the highland people and the tribes of the tropical lowlands. The deluge is commonly connected with the creation and with an epiphany, manifestation of the Creator God. It is sometimes regarded as a divine punishment wiping out existing humankind in preparation for the emergence of a new race. Paragraph 19. Likewise, the Maya in Mexico and Central America had their flood legend that involves a universal deluge, or Hayokokab, which means water over the earth. Catholic Bishop Las Casas wrote that the Guatemalan Indians called it Butik, which is the word which means flood of many waters and means the final judgment. And so they believe that another Butik is about to come, which is another flood and judgment, not of water but of fire. Many more flood legends exist around the world, but the few already quoted serve to confirm the kernel of the legend, the historical event related in the book of Genesis. Paragraph 20. The all pervasive immortal soul belief. However, not all myths have a basis in fact or in the Bible. However, not all myths have a basis in fact or in the Bible. Okay. In his search for God, man has clutched at straws, deluded by the illusion of immortality. As we will see throughout this book, the belief in an immortal soul or variations thereof is a legacy that has come down to us through the millenniums. The people of the ancient Assyro-Babylonian culture believe in the afterlife. The New Larousse Encyclopedia of Mythology explains, under the earth, beyond the abyss of the Apsu, full of fresh water and encircling the earth, lay the infernal dwelling place to which men descended after death. It was the land of no return, in these regions of eternal darkness. The souls of the dead, Edumu, clad, clad like birds, in a garment of wings, are all jumbled together. According to the myth, this subterranean world was ruled over by the goddess Ereshkigal, princess of the great earth. Paragraph 21. The Egyptians likewise had their idea of an immortal soul. Before the soul could reach a happy heaven, it had to be weighed against Mat, the goddess of truth and justice, who was symbolized by the feather of truth. Either Anubis, the jackal-headed god, or Horus, the falcon, helped in the procedure. It approved by Osiris. That soul would go on to share bliss with the gods. As is so often the case, here we find the common thread of the Babylonian immortal soul concept, shaping people's religion, lives, and actions. Paragraph 22. The old Chinese mythology included a belief in survival after death and the need to keep ancestors happy. Ancestors were conceived as living and powerful spirits, all virtually concerns about the welfare of their living descendants, but capable of punitive anger is displeased. The dead were to be given every aid, including companions in death. Thus, some shag kings were buried with anywhere from 100 to 300 human victims who were to be his attendants in the next world. This practice links ancient China with Egypt, Africa, Japan, and other places where similar sacrifices were made. In these cases, Man's Religion by John B. Noss. In these cases, belief in an immortal soul led to human sacrifices. Contrast Ecclesiastes 9, 5, and 10, Isaiah 38, 18, and 19. The Greeks, paragraph 23, having formulated many gods in their mythology, were also concerned with the dead and their destination. According to the myths, the one put in charge of the realm of murky darkness was the son of Cronus and brother of the gods Zeus and Poseidon. His name was Hades, and his realm was named after him. How did the souls of the dead reach Hades? Supplementary information. Hades appears in the Christian Greek scriptures 10 times, not as a mythological person, but as a common grave of mankind. It is the Greek equivalent of Hebrew Sheol. Compare Psalm 16:10, Acts 2:27, Kingdom Interlinear. Paragraph 4. Writer Ellen Switzer explains there were frightening creatures in the underworld. There was Charon, who rode the ferry that transported those who had recently died from the land of the living to the underworld. Charon required payment for his ferry service across the river Styx, and the Greeks often buried their dead with a coin under the tongue to make sure that they had the proper fare. Dead souls who could not pay were kept on the wrong side of the river in a kind of no man's land and might return to haunt the living. Supplementary information. Interestingly, Unapishtim, the hero of the Epic of Gilgamesh, had his boatman Urshanabi, who took Gilgamesh over the waters of death to meet the flood survivors. Paragraph 25. The Greek mythology of the soul went on to influence the Roman concept and the Greek philosophers such as Plato. about 427 to 343 BCE. Strongly influenced early apostate Christian thinkers who accepted the immortal soul teaching into their doctrine even thought it had no biblical basis. Paragraph 26. The Aztecs, Incas, and Maya also believed in an immortal soul. Death was as much a mystery to them as it was to other civilizations. They had their ceremonies and beliefs to help them reconcile themselves to it. As the archaeological historian Victor W. von Hagen explains in his book, The Ancient Sun Kingdoms of the Americas, the dead were in reality living. They had merely passed from one phase to another. They were invisible, impalpable, invulnerable. The dead had become the unseen members of the clan. Contrast Judges 6:13, Ezekiel 8:4, and 20. Paragraph 27. The same source tells us that the Inca Indian believed in immortality. In fact, he believed one never died. The dead body merely became undead as it took on the influences of the unseen powers. The Maya, too, believed in a soul and in 13 heavens and 9 hells. Thus, wherever we turn, people have wanted to deny the reality of death, and the immortal soul has been the crutch to lean on. Isaiah 38:18, Acts 3:23. Paragraph 28. African mythologies likewise include references to a surviving soul. Many Africans live in awe of the souls of the dead. The New Larousse Encyclopedia of Mythology states, this belief is bound up with another, the continuing existence of the soul after death. Magicians are able to call on souls to aid their powers. The souls of the dead often transmigrate into the bodies of animals, or may even be reincarnated in plants. As a consequence, the Zulu will not kill some snakes that they believe to be the spirits of relatives. Paragraph 29. The Maasai of southeastern Africa believe in a creator called Nk-ai, who places a guardian angel by each Maasai as a protection. At the moment of death, the angel takes the warrior's soul to the hereafter. The previously quoted Larousse supplies a Zulu death legend involving the first man, Unkulunkulu, who for this myth had become the supreme being. He sent the chameleon to tell mankind, men shall not die. The chameleon was slow and got distracted on the way, so Unkulunkulu sent a different messenger by means of a lizard, saying, men shall die. The lizard got there first, and ever since no man has escaped death. With variations, this same legend exists among the Bachuana, Basutu, and Baronga tribes. Paragraph 30. As we pursue the study of mankind's search for God, we see even further how important the myth of the immortal soul has been and still is to mankind. Paragraph 31. Sun worship and human sacrifices. The mythology of Egypt embraces an extensive pantheon of gods and goddesses. As in so many other ancient societies, while the Egyptians searched for God, they gravitated toward worshiping that which sustained their daily life, the sun. Thus, under the name Ra, Amun-Ra, they venerated the sovereign lord of the sky, who took a boat ride every day from east to west. When night fell, he followed a dangerous course through the underworld. Paragraph 32. Human sacrifices were a common feature in the sun worship of the Aztec, Inca, and Maya religions. The Aztecs celebrated a constant cycle of religious festivals with human sacrifices to their various gods, especially in the worship of the sun god Tezcatlipoca, also in the festival of the fire god Shutekutli, who Hetot, a prisoner of war, danced together with their captors and were whirled about a dazzling fire and then dumped into the coals, fished out while still alive to have their still palpitating hearts cut out to be offered to the gods, the ancient sun kingdoms of the Americas. Paragraph 33. farther south, the Inca religion had its own sacrifices and myths. In ancient Inca worship, children and animals were offered to the sun god Inti and to Viracocha, the creator. Paragraph 34. Mythical gods and goddesses. The most prominent of the Egyptian triads is that made up of Isis, symbol of divine motherhood, Osiris, her brother and consort, and Horus, their son, usually represented by a falcon. Isis is sometimes portrayed in Egyptian statues, offering her breast to her child in a pose very reminiscent of Christendom's Virgin and Child statues and paintings, which come on the scene over 2,000 years later. In time, Isis' husband Osiris achieved popularity as the god of the dead because he offered hope of an eternally happy life for the souls of the dead in the hereafter. Paragraph 35. Egypt's Hathor was the goddess of love and joy, music and dancing. She became the queen of the dead, helping them with a ladder to achieve heaven. As the new Larousse Encyclopedia of Mythology explains, she was celebrated with great festivals, above all on New Year's Day, which was the anniversary of her birth. Before dawn, the priestesses would bring Hathor's image out onto the terrace to expose it to the rays of the rising sun. The rejoicing which followed was a pretext for a veritable carnival, and the day ended in song and intoxication. Have things changed all that much in New Year's celebrations thousands of years later? Paragraph 36. The Egyptians also had many animal gods and goddesses in their pantheon, such as Apis the bull, Benedid the ram, Hek the frog, Hathor the cow, and Sebek the crocodile. Romans 1:21 to 23. It was in this religion setting that the Israelites found themselves in captivity as slaves in the 16th century BCE. To release them from Pharaoh's stubborn grip, Jehovah the God of Israel had to send 10 different plagues around against Egypt. Exodus 7:14 through 12:36. Those plagues amounted to a calculated humiliation of the mythical gods of Egypt. Paragraph 37. Now let us move on to the gods of ancient Greece and Rome. Rome borrowed many gods from the ancient Greece, along with their virtues and vices. For example, Venus and Flora were brazen prostitutes. Bacchus was a drunkard and reveler. Mercury was a highway robber, and Apollos was a seducer of women. It is reported that Jupiter, the father of the gods, committed adultery or incest with about 59 women. What a reminder of the rebel angels who cohabited with women before the flood. Since worshippers tend to reflect the conduct of their gods, it is any wonder that Roman emperors such as Tiberius Nero and Caligula led debauched lives as adulterers, fornicators, and murderers. Paragraph 38. In their religion, the Roman incorporated gods from many traditions. For example, they took up with enthusiasm the worship of Mithra, the Persian god of light, who became their sun god, and the Syrian goddess Atargatis, Ishtar. They converted the Grecian Artemis, the huntress, into Diana and had their own variations of the Egyptian Isis. They also adopted the Celtic triple goddess of fertility. Acts 19:23 to 28. Paragraph 39. For the practice of their public cults at hundreds of shrines and temples, they had a variety of priests, all of whom came under the authority of the Pontifex Maximus, Supreme Pontiff, who was the head of the state religion, Atlas of the Roman world. The same Atlas states that one of the Roman ceremonies was the Taurobolium, in which the worshipper stood in a pit and was bathed in the blood of a bull sacrificed over him. He emerged from this rite in a state of purified innocence. Paragraph 40. Christian myths and legends. According to some modern critics, Christianity also embraces myths and legends. Is that really so? Many scholars reject as myths the virgin birth of Jesus, his miracles, and his resurrection. Some even say he has never existed, but that is his myth. But that his myth is a carryover from more ancient mythology and sun worship. As mythology expert Joseph Campbell wrote, several scholars have suggested, therefore, that there was never either John the Baptizer or Jesus, but only a water god and a sun god. But we need to remember that many of these same scholars are atheists and thus reject totally any belief in God. Paragraph 24. However, this skeptical point of view flies in the face of historical evidence. For example, the Jewish historian Josephus, circa 37, circa 100, wrote, "To some of the Jews, the destruction of Herod's army seemed to be divine vengeance, and certainly a just vengeance, for his treatment of John, surnamed the Baptist, for Herod had put him to death, though he was a good man." Paragraph 42, 43, and 44. This same historian also testifies to the historical existence of Jesus Christ, when he wrote that there arose a certain Jew, a wizard of a man, if indeed he may be called a man, whom his disciples call a son of God. He continued by saying that Pilate had sentenced him, and even now the race of those who are called Messianists after him is not extinct. Therefore, the Christian apostle Paul could write with total conviction as an eyewitness of Jesus' transfiguration, saying, "No, it was not by following artfully conceived false stories, Greek mythos, that we acquainted you with the power and presence of our Lord Jesus Christ, but it was by having become eyewitnesses of his magnificence. For he received from God the Father honor and glory, when words such as these were borne to him by the magnificent glory. This is my Son, my beloved, who I myself have approved. Yes, these words we heard born from heaven while we were with him in the holy mountain." 2 Peter 1:6-18. In this conflict between man's exert opinion and God's word, we must apply the principle stated earlier. What then is the case? If some did not express faith, will their lack of faith perhaps make the faithfulness of God without effect? Never may that happen. But let God be found true, though every man be found a liar. Even as it is written, that you might be proved righteous in your words, and might win when you are being judged. Romans 3:3 and 4. Common threads, paragraph 45, 46, and 47. This brief review of some of the world's mythologies have served to indicate some common features, many of which can be traced back to Babylon, the Mesopotamian cradle of most religions. There are common threads, whether in the facts of creation or in accounts about a period when demigods and giants occupied the land and the deluge destroyed the wicked, or in the basic religion concepts of sun worship and an immortal soul. From a biblical viewpoint, we can explain these common threads when we recall that after the flood, at God's behest, mankind spread out from Babel in Mesopotamia more than 4,200 years ago. Although they separated, forming families and tribes with different languages, they started off with the same basic understanding of prior history and religious concepts. Genesis 11, 1-9. Over the centuries, this understanding became distorted and adorned in each culture, resulting in many of the fictions, legends, and myths that have come down to us today. These myths, divorced from Bible truth, failed to bring mankind nearer to the true God. However, mankind has also expressed their religious sentiments in various other ways: spiritism, shamanism, magic, ancestor worship, and so on. Do they tell us anything about mankind's search for God? Supplementary information. Gods of the Roman soldiers. Rome is famous for its disciplined army. The cohesion of its emperor depended on the morale and the effectiveness of the military legions. Was religion a factor to be reckoned with? Yes. And fortunately for us, the Romans left behind clear evidence of their occupation in the form of highways, fortresses, aqueducts, colosseums, and temples. For example, in Northumbria, in the north of England, there is the famous Hadrian Wall, built about 122 CE. What have excavations revealed about Roman garrison activity and the role of religion? In the Hallstatt Museum, located near the excavated ruins of a Roman garrison on Hadrian's Wall, an exhibit states the religious life of a Roman soldier was divided into three parts. Firstly, the cult of the deified emperors and the worship of the protecting gods of Rome, such as Jupiter, Victory, and Mars. An altar was dedicated to Jupiter every year on the parade ground of each fort. All soldiers were expected to participate in the festivals celebrating the birthdays, accessions, days, and victories of the deified emperors. How similar to the customs of armies today, in which chaplains, altars, and flags are a regular part of the army's worship. But what was the second feature of the Roman soldiers' religious life? It was the worship of protecting gods and the guardian spirits of their particular unit, as well as the gods brought their native lands. Finally, there were the cults followed by the individual. As long as a soldier fulfilled his obligations to the official cults, he was free to worship any god he wished. That sounds like a very liberal freedom of worship situation, but exceptions were those religions of which Druidism was one, whose practices were considered inhumane, and those whose loyalty to the state was suspect. For example, Christianity. Compare Luke 20:21 to 25, chapter 23, verse 1 and 2, Acts 10:1, 2, and 22. Interestingly, in 1949, a temple to Mithras was discovered in a bog at Karaburg, quite close to Hadrian's Wall. Archaeologists estimate that it was built about 205 CE. It contains a sun god image, altars, and a Latin inscription that states in part to the invincible god Mithras. Egypt's gods and the 10 plagues. Plague 1. Nile and other waters turned to blood. Nile god happy, disgraced. Plague 2. Frogs. Frog goddess Hek, powerless to prevent it. Plague 3. Dust turned to gnats. Thoth, lord of magic, could not help the Egyptian magicians. Plague 4. Gadflies on all Egypt, except Goshen, where Israel dwelt. No god was able to prevent it, not even Ptah, creator of the universe, or Thoth, lord of magic. Plague 5. Pestilence on livestock. Neither sacred cow- cowdesses, Hathor, nor Apis the bull could prevent this plague. Plague 6. Boils. Healer deities Thoth, Isis, and Ptah unable to help. Paragraph Plague 7. Thunder and hail. Expose the impotent of Reshpu, controller of lightning, and Thoth, god of rain and thunder. Plague 9. Locusts. This was a blow to the fertility god Men, protector of crops. Plague 9. 3 days of darkness. Ra, the preeminent sun god, and Horus, a solar god, disgrace. Plague 10. Death of the firstborn, including Pharaoh's, who was considered to be a god incarnate. Ra, Amen Ra, sun god and sometimes represented as a ram was unable to impede it.